Good morning and welcome to our presentation on the European Union competition policy. We decided to represent the EU competition policy as a house, and we will therefore take you on a visit of this house to explain to you how those policies affect firms and businesses. In a free market, sometimes companies are tempted to avoid competing with each other and try to set their own rules for the game. At times, a major player in the game may try to squeeze its competitors out of the market. The European Commission acts as a referee to ensure that all companies play by the same rules. A bit of history. The competition policy was set out in 1957 through the Treaty of Rome and has been evolving throughout history in order to make its influence even greater. As said earlier, it has for main purpose to make competition fair for everyone. The European Commission competition policy concerns four major areas of anti-competitiveness: antitrust, mergers, liberalization, and state aid. We will try to see what influence they have on businesses. A large number of regulations have been implemented in order to prevent firms from threatening the well-being of fair competition in the European market. Not being able to state all the different policies implemented by the Commission, we try to divide them and select the ones that we think are the most representative of the purpose of the European Union competition policy. The first policy that we're going to talk about is the antitrust policy. This deals with anti-competitive maneuvers such as price fixing and attempts to control production and distribution, but also with abuses of dominant positions such as monopolies. Those types of regulations are useful in order to protect the competitiveness of small companies. In fact, by preventing big companies from taking too much advantage of their power in the market, the Commission provides SMEs the opportunity to compete fairly in markets sometimes dominated by one or a few companies. Moreover, it helps new entrants make their way in by lowering barriers to entry that some companies could purposely make bigger. The consequence of this is transformed into a threat for large companies. In fact, it becomes more difficult for them to protect their market share from the increase of competition. The major target of this regulation is to prevent big firms from creating cartels between themselves. Normally done in order to fix prices or divide markets between themselves, firms are now pushed to increase investments to develop new products in order to stay competitive, hence reducing their profit margins. Those successes were made possible thanks to one policy, the leniency policy. The leniency policy encourages companies to hand over inside evidence of cartels to the European Commission. The first company in any cartel to do so will not have to pay a fine. This results in the cartel being destabilized and eventually breaking down. In 2001, the European Commission fined French tire maker Michelin 20 million euros for abusing its dominant position in the market for heavy vehicle replacement tires in France during most of the 1990s. Over 50% of new replacement tires for heavy vehicles and an even higher share of retread tires were made by them. None of its competitors were comparable in size, so it was difficult for dealers to avoid doing business with Michelin. They used a system of rebates and bonuses to make dealers dependent on their tires and prevented them from choosing their suppliers freely. On October 7, 2009, the Commission adopted a decision relating to a proceeding under Article 101 TFEU, formerly Article 81 of the EC Treaty, imposing fines of 67.6 million euros on European and Japanese producers of power transformers. This case is a good example on how the Commission rewards cooperation to combat cartels by considerably reducing fines even when cooperation is not covered by the scope of the leniency notice. Based on a thorough analysis of cooperation by the two parties, the Commission concluded that an 18% reduction of fines outside the leniency notice was justified for both. In so doing, the Commission encouraged and rewarded cooperation in the fight against cartels. The decision was addressed to 9 legal entities belonging to 7 undertakings. From June 9, 1999 until the 15th May 2003, the addressees participated in a single and continuous infringement. They agreed to share markets under a gentleman's agreement between European and Japanese producers of power transformers to respect each other's home markets and to refrain from selling in these markets. Another one of the regulations that we decided to focus on is the one preventing from limiting or controlling production, markets, technical development, or investments. For this regulation, we decided to focus especially on distribution. The opportunities that arose mainly concern the SMEs playing a distribution role. In fact, it provides them with more power when contracting with manufacturers and also more freedom in determining their distribution channel and which market to deliver to. The flip side of this are the threats posed to the manufacturers. In fact, they are faced with limits when trying to set their own terms when coming to an agreement with distributors on the method of distribution. In order to illustrate the latter, we used the Volkswagen AG 90 million euros finding case. In this case, Volkswagen's Italian dealers were selling cheaper cars than anyone else in Europe. Those low prices attracted consumers from other EU states, among them Austrian and German customers. Seeing its profits fall in those respective markets, Volkswagen banned the Italian dealers from selling abroad and limited them to domestic sales. This corresponds to an infringement of the EU policy and clearly shows the threat that those regulations have on manufacturers. The next era that we are going to talk about is the one concerning mergers. The latter can be considered as another way for companies to make the competition powerless. In fact, two major players in an industry joining forces may simply lead to another threat to competition, which is monopoly. The European Commission therefore intervenes when the changes in the competitive structure of the market is having negative effects. With the large firms facing growth limits, the small and medium-sized companies have the opportunity to gain a larger market share and grow in a more effective way by merging. The synergy created by this action, permitting companies to benefit from each other, gives them the tools to catch up with the competitive advantage that the dominant firms already have. This support for SMEs therefore contributes to the expansion of globalization by permitting the expansion of those companies in Europe or internationally. Again, all those regulations have different effects depending on which perspective it's taken. Hence, we see that the opportunities for some firms are turned into threats for the others. The first threat that this regulation poses to companies is simply the uncertainty of the mergers to go through. This may generally apply to large companies, but this small uncertainty created by the policy may have a big effect on their share prices. In fact, it's a common law that in finance, speculation and bad vibes emerging from companies drop them into an uncertainty bubble, directly exposing their shares to fluctuation. An example of a banned merger is the tentative of Dutch Bourse and the New York Stock Exchange Euronext. The case is simple. The merger was prohibited because it would have resulted in a quasi-monopoly in the era of European financial derivatives traded globally on exchanges. The merger resulting in those two companies controlling together more than 90% of the global trade in these products, the Commission found that through investigation that it would have critically affected the possibility of new entrants to compete significantly against them. The companies therefore tried to find a compromise, but it wasn't convincing enough to solve the identified competition concerns. One example of how companies benefit under the merger control regulation is the Anglo-Swedish AstraZeneca's acquisition of UK's Kudos Pharmaceuticals. To provide more of a background, AstraZeneca is one of the world's leading pharmaceutical companies with healthcare sales of over $21.4 billion and leading positions in sales of gastrointestinal, cardiovascular, respiratory, oncology, and neuroscience products. The acquired company, Kudos Pharmaceuticals, is a company that develops cancer treatments based on the inhibition of DNA repair. The $210 million cash acquisition of the UK pharmaceuticals company provided the company with a widely recognized